Hello there. Welcome back. It's great to see you. It's been a little while again, sorry. Kids had chickenpox, so like the last week was completely wiped out because, as the parents amongst you will know, or if you remember having chickenpox, you don't sleep. It's horrible. You just get itchy all over. Not me, obviously, just the kids. And you scream and you cry, and nobody sleeps. So it's just been a really grueling week. And I put my back out, which was incredibly painful. Two things weren't connected. But a bit of a rubbish week this week. But I'm back. Kids are back at school. My back is back to being a back. And ready to carry on with The Storm, otherwise known as The Fury Part 2. We are, just following Rilke and Cal and Brick and Daisy and the others. Rilke and Schiller and Jade and Marcus have gone off following Rilke, who thinks her job is to destroy the world, and she's doing that. She's literally just killing anyone she comes across, apart from a person called Howie, who has the Fury as well, and they saved him from being beaten to death, and now he's kind of frozen, he's about to turn. So we've got that faction who are going off destroying the world. We've also got Daisy and Cal and Brick and little Adam. They have no idea what's going on. They're just trying to stay alive. But Cal has just suggested that maybe they should go and find a church, because these things they think are maybe angels. Who knows? They're at a bit of a loss. But what they do know is that the world is probably still trying to kill them. Rilke's probably trying to kill them. And there's also the man in the storm, who has just erupted into the sky and is basically sucking down everything. Everything. Who knows what's going on? I certainly don't. Don't blame me for this. I only wrote the thing. So, Cal, East Walsham, Norfolk, 7:49am. The Freelander juddered, looking for a moment like it might keep going, and then conked out with a quiet wheeze. "Oh, damn it," said Cal, turning the key. The engine gave out a series of pathetic coughs, but no matter how hard he wished for it, he couldn't get the petrol gauge to lift. It's empty. "Nice one," grunted Brick, his face screwed up in a way that instantly made Cal's blood boil. "You didn't bring any extra fuel with you?" "Yeah, Brick, I popped into a garage on my way out of London, fought off the ferals and filled up a couple of spare tanks, got myself a pack of Haribo and a cup of coffee too. What do you think?" Brick slammed his palm against the dashboard and opened his door. Cal took a deep breath and clambered out after him. The air was so much cleaner here. It didn't taste like a crematorium. The journey had pretty much blown all of the powdered flesh from the car, leaving only pockets in the corners of the windows and the alloy wheels. Cal breathed deep as he took in his surroundings. Nothing but fields, trees and hedges in every direction. The only evidence of where they'd come from was a grey fuzz against the sky. At least it was warm, though. The dawning sun like a jacket thrown over Cal's shoulders. "Where are we?" said Brick, hawking up a spitball and launching it into the verge. "Not sure," Cal replied. "Been heading west, pretty much. It's hard to tell." The sat-nav had been working, but he hadn't known what address to put in, so he just used it as a guide, following the spider web of roads that led out from Norwich. He'd kept to the smallest ones, and so far they'd only passed 3 other vehicles, 2 cars which barrelled past fast enough to rock the Freelander, and a tractor in front which they'd kept well behind until it turned off into a farm. They'd passed through a few villages, but they'd largely been deserted. Last sign I saw said something like Tuttenham, something like that. "So where is that?" Brick snapped back. "You're the local, you tell me." For a moment they eyeballed each other, quietly fuming. "OK," Cal said, sighing. "OK, so I guess we continue on foot, yeah?" Brick shrugged, looking a quarter of his 18 years. He scuffed the ground with a dirty trainer, then combed his fingers through his hair. "Probably a town or a village or something around here," he mumbled. "Maybe a farm. We could nick some red diesel." Cal shrugged. "Worth a try. You want Adam or Daisy?" Brick didn't answer. He just started traipsing up the road, his powder-covered body looking like some strange, gangly ghost in the soft morning light. Cal opened up the back door to see Adam there, as wide-eyed as always. The little boy was shivering. "Do you want to get out the car?" Cal asked him. "Get us some sun? It's freezing in here." Adam glanced nervously at the girl in the boot. "It's okay. Daisy's coming too. Maybe the warmth will help thaw her out. Come on." Adam shuffled off his seat onto the road. Cal smiled at him, then walked to the back of the Freelander. The windows here were frosted over like it was Christmas, and when he tried to open the boot door, he found it was iced shut. He kicked at it a couple of times, shaking loose flakes of crystal, and finally managed to work it free. Daisy lay cocooned inside a web of silk, her face as white and as fragile as bone china. She looked dead, but he knew she was just asleep. What was the word? Metamorphosizing. Oh, that's not a word, sorry. Metamorphosing. Metamorphosizing, I just made that up. Metamorphosing. Cal thought of Schiller, consumed by fire, and wondered if Daisy would be better off dead. If they all would be. Here we go, he said, easing his hands under Daisy's rigid body and lifting her from the boot. She seemed lighter, despite the crusting of ice, and the way she sparkled was almost terrifying. Cal's skin burned from the cold, his hands already numb, but he held her close and tight. Hang on in there, Daisy. We're going to find help. Adam was waiting by the front of the car, and he offered a glimmer of a smile when he saw Daisy. See, she's going to be fine, Cal said. We all are. He cast a look back at the empty Freelander, then set off along the lane. Brick had vanished, but after 50 metres or so, his head popped up from the large grassy bank that lined the tarmac. We'd better get off the road, he said. Fury or no fury, Norfolk drivers are all twats. Cal waited for Adam to scramble up the verge, then staggered over, almost falling down the other side. He stumbled into a field of bright yellow plants, only just managing to keep his feet, and twisting his ankle in the process. He bit back a curse, limping to Brick's side. Thanks for the help, he said, but the other boy was already walking away. Cal set off after him, taking a couple of deep, shivering breaths to calm himself down. Adam trotted by his side, occasionally breaking into a run to keep up. The only sound, other than the crunch of their feet on the dry earth, was the chattering of the birds. They'd sing right to the end, Cal thought, even as the world came apart around them. What are we going to do if people have still got the fury? Brick asked after a minute or two. I don't know, Cal said. You think they'll still come after us? I don't know. Brick kicked at a stone, sending it tumbling into the shadows between the crops. They walked in silence, crossing a dry ditch and pushing through a hedge at the end of the field. The next stretch of land was bare, which made the going easier. They'd only walked a few paces before Cal felt Adam tugging on his tracksuit trousers. The boy was pointing, and sure enough, when Cal followed his finger, he saw a squat stone tower thrusting up from the hedgerows. Ah, well spotted, he said, smiling. Adam beamed back, brighter than the sun. See that, mate? Brick glanced up, shielding his eyes even though the sun was behind them. It was hard to tell how far away the church was, maybe a mile or two. I still don't know why you want a church, Brick answered. Fat lot of good it's going to do us. Well, you haven't exactly been full of suggestions, Cal shot back, feeling as if he was about to come down with a bout of the fury himself. Brick had a way of doing that to people, rubbing them up the wrong way. I just thought, I don't know, if these things inside us really are angels. They're not angels, Cal. Well, if they are, then maybe a vicar or something can help us. He can tell us what to do. Maybe there's something in the Bible, I don't know. Just saying it made him realise how futile this was. Whatever was happening, it had nothing to do with Christianity. I don't know, he repeated, but I can't think of anything else, can you? Brick just snorted. Oh yeah, well screw you, Cal said. If you want to go off and do your own thing, I'm not stopping you. Fine, said Brick. We'll try the church, but it won't do any good. Cal hoisted Daisy up to his chest, his teeth chattering. It took them 10 minutes to reach the end of the field, and another 5 to work out a way past a barbed wire fence. Beyond was a dirt track that ran beside a pasture full of cows, the animals staring at them with those sad, black eyes. At least they weren't trying to charge them down, though. Being trampled to death by a field of furious cattle would not be a good way to go. You ever shot a cow, Pat? Brick asked. The question was so surreal that Cal had to pause for a moment to make sure he'd heard him right. Shot a cow, Pat? Yeah, with a shotgun. No, Brick, I'm from London. We don't have shotguns or cowpats. Why? Brick made a noise that could have been a laugh. It's like watching a turd volcano, he said, and Cal could hear the smile in his voice. My mate Davey had a 12-gauge. Took me out one day up in his farm and we shot up a whole field of cowpats. Seriously, they go 10 metres up. You've never seen anything like it. Cal shook his head, lost for words. He'd known Brick for less than a week, but he figured he could spend years with the boy and still not be able to figure out his moods. I shot one and it absolutely covered Davey in crap. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. That sounds hilarious, Cal replied. Wish I had one now, Brick said. A cowpat? Take your pick. There are hundreds over there. A shotgun, you douche, he said. I feel a lot safer walking into a church if I had a weapon. Yeah, because last time we had a gun, it worked out great for everyone. Cal would never forget being held at gunpoint by the man out in Fursville, the way that Rilke had shot him in the head without hesitation, and the thing that had burst out of his body. That had been their first glimpse at the truth of what lived inside them. Rilke had shot Brick's girlfriend too, Cal suddenly remembered. His cheeks burning. Oh, sorry man, I didn't mean to say it like that. Brick didn't answer. He just kicked out at the track, scattering pebbles. He was making such a racket that Cal almost didn't hear the sound of an engine up ahead, rising and fading. He slowed, cocking his head as another distant growl came and went. Must be a road, Brick said. What should we do? Get closer and see what happens, yeah? It wasn't exactly the best plan in the world, but that was the trouble with the Fury. You only knew if it was there or not by getting up close and personal, and by that time chances were you had somebody's teeth in you. Brick didn't reply. He just stepped over the fence. He held out his hands and Cal passed Daisy to him. His arms were 2 blocks of cold stone, but somehow he managed to lift Adam over the fence before stepping over himself. The field was starting to rise above the track, and they walked up the hill in silence, listening to the traffic up ahead. Cal counted 7 vehicles coming and going before they reached the end. He hunkered down, peering through the fence to see a road below them. A pavement ran alongside both sides, and there were houses opposite, large detached properties with thatched roofs and wide driveways. To the left, the road led towards a small town. Cal could make out what might have been a bakery and a Tesco store. Rising above it all was the church tower. There were people up there, 6 or 7 of them, too far away to make out properly. 3 disappeared into the supermarket, their laughter ghosting down the road. What do you think? Cal asked. How the hell should I know? Brick replied, clutching Daisy to his chest and shivering. We could go down there and get our faces ripped off. Cal straightened and offered Brick a nervous smile. I guess there's only one way to find out. Brick. East Walsham, 8:23 a.m. Brick watched Cal stumble across the field, Adam teetering after him, but he couldn't bring himself to follow. Daisy was cradled in his arms, and the cold that blasted from her had turned his bones to ice, rooting him to the spot. He suddenly realised just how exhausted he was, his body and his mind running on fumes, ready to sputter out like the car. Getting to his feet seemed like the most impossible thing in the world. Cal must have read his mind, because he glanced back over his shoulder. Come on, mate, I can't do this on my own. Adam staggered back, stumbling on the uneven ground. The little boy reached out and grabbed Brick's t-shirt, gently tugging on it. His eyes were pockets of sunlight, dazzlingly bright, and they seemed to lend a little warmth to Brick's body. He took a deep breath and pushed himself to his feet, a head rush making him feel like he was pirouetting across the field. When it had settled, he took a step, then another, following Cal towards the tower. Maybe we should do the whole distraction thing again, Cal said, like at the factory, yeah? Brick shrugged, even though he knew Cal wouldn't see it. At the factory there had only been one guard to distract, and even that had gone wrong. I could lead them off, try to make a path for you to get Daisy and Adam into the church, Cal went on. Or, you're faster than me, you could do it. Fat chance, Brick thought, saying, what if the church is full of people? On a Monday morning? It won't be. What if it's locked? Cal put both hands on his head, grabbing fistfuls of hair. OK, Brick said, fine, whatever, let's try it. Ahead, the field sloped down towards the road, running alongside it all the way to the edge of the village. There was a scratch of hedge there, more hole than leaf. It would offer absolutely no protection if the ferals sensed them. Cal hunkered down, moving quickly down the hill. Another car idled along the road, maybe 30 metres away, followed by a Royal Mail truck. For a village, this place looked pretty mobbed. You should go round the back, Cal said, through those gardens. Try and cut through. He was pointing to where the field joined the houses at the back of the village, a few small gardens boxed in by fences. What about you? He asked. I'll take the main street. If they've still got the Fury, I'll draw them off. He wiped a hand across his mouth. His fingers were trembling. Right now, Cal didn't look as though he could stagger another 20 metres, let alone outrun an entire village of ferals. Maybe I'll get over there and no one will notice me, yeah? Brick shrugged again. He hoisted Daisy up, the girl so light and yet somehow now the heaviest thing in the world. Stay with Brick, Adam. He'll look after you until I get back. The little boy's mouth drooped, but still he didn't speak. Cal looked at Brick and nodded. Then he was on the move again, heading down the hill towards the road. Brick watched him for another few seconds, swore, then set off in the direction of the houses. With Daisy in his arms and Adam clinging onto his t-shirt, the going was tough. Twice he tripped on the dry earth, and it seemed to take forever before he stopped beside the first fence. There were no screams, no squealing brakes, no explosions. The fence was a little shorter than him, and he stood on his tiptoes and peered over it. Beyond was a shoebox of a garden leading up to a terraced house. The house had a passage down the side of it, and Brick took a few paces to his left so that he could see to the end. There was a gate there, probably locked. He stumbled to the next garden, this one surrounded by a thick hedge. The one past that had barbed wire coiled around the top of its fence, but the fourth house along was falling to pieces, its derelict wooden conservatory missing several panes of glass. A quick glance down the passage revealed a straight path to the road beyond. There was no gate, but the garden wasn't exactly Alcatraz. The fence was coming loose, and he kicked out at it in a hail of splinters. He tried again, and with a damp creak the panel tumbled into the overgrown grass. The house was blind, curtains pulled tight across every window. "Come on," he said, traipsing through the garden and into the passageway. Their footsteps echoed off the walls, making it sound as though there was somebody right behind them, and twice he checked over his shoulder to be sure. Sunlight spilled through the arch at the far end, and he stepped cautiously into its heat, squinting until the light-bleached road came into focus. It was a residential street, small houses standing shoulder to shoulder like soldiers. He held his breath, once again listening for noise. The air was hot and silent, as if the whole town was imitating him, holding its breath too, waiting for the right moment to spring to life. He swallowed hard, his throat like sandpaper. Then he stepped out of the passageway onto the pavement. It was deserted, but wouldn't there be people inside the houses? Wouldn't they have sensed him by now and come streaming from their doors and windows? He angled his gaze up to see the church tower, close enough now that he could make out the weathered gargoyles on its steeple. A distant car horn cut through the heavy quiet, making Brick jump so hard that Daisy almost slipped from his grip. He clamped her to his chest. "Wake up, Daisy," he thought, as he set off across the road, heading for the passageway opposite. "Please wake up. I can't carry you forever." Then he remembered what she'd be when she woke, and he sucked the wish back into the darkness of his thoughts. The houses on this side had gates on their passageways, but a little further up the terraced properties gave way to larger semi-detached houses. He cut through a gravel driveway and down a long, perfectly manicured garden. The hum of traffic was louder here, and he thought he could hear voices too. He reached a wall and leant against the crumbling brickwork, trying to catch his breath. "Can you climb it?" he asked Adam. The little boy looked up at the wall, all 6 foot of it, and shook his head. Brick grunted in frustration, crouching down and gently laying Daisy on the ground. He rubbed his arms, trying to warm them up, then grabbed Adam under his armpits. His hands were so numb, and the boy so light, it was like lifting air. He boosted him to the top of the wall and sat him there. "Just lower yourself down. It's not far." Adam shook his head again, fear etched into his features. "Just do it," Brick snapped, "unless you want me to push you off." The kid wiped his arm over his face, smudging away tears. He eased himself around, clinging on with white-knuckled fingers as he dropped. Brick ducked to scoop up Daisy, and it was as he was straightening that he heard the sound of a door opening. He glanced back, seeing a man step from the house. He was wearing jogging trousers and a vest, his face unshaven, and he looked pissed. "Hey, you! What the hell do you think you're doing?" How far away was he? It was a big garden, maybe 20 metres between the back door and the wall, give or take. Brick didn't move, even his heart seeming to slow its frantic beat. Waiting. The man took a step forward. He had to be close enough for the fury, didn't he? "I'm talking to you," he yelled. "Get out of my garden before I call the police." Another step. Brick retreated until the wall was against his back. The man had stopped, staring at him, the two of them in a deadlock. Maybe the guy would just go back inside. Brick was tall and he had one of those faces, the kind that made you think twice about picking a fight. Maybe he'd just back off, lock the door behind him and call the cops. But there was a part of Brick that had to know whether the fury was still there. The man rubbed his stubbled face, frowning. He was looking at the bundle in Brick's arms. "What you got there?" he said. "What is that?" Brick ignored him, turning to the wall and trying to lift Daisy. His arms felt as if they were made of glass, ready to shatter, and he didn't have the strength. He tried again, groaning with the effort. This time he managed to boost her to the top of the wall, but he couldn't angle her body over. His muscles gave out and she tumbled to the ground by his feet like a rag doll, like a dead thing. "Hey, get away from her!" the man shouted. Brick heard him start to run. He bent down, grabbing fistfuls of Daisy's clothes and flesh, not caring if he hurt her. He pulled her up, bracing her against the wall with his chest while he repositioned his arms. "Get away from her!" The man's voice was a wet slur, and Brick almost screamed when he heard it. He got his body under Daisy, pushing her up like an Olympic weightlifter. The man coughed out more words, his footsteps drumming the ground. Louder, closer. "Don't look, Brick. Just get over the wall. Just get over the goddamn wall." He shunted Daisy with everything he had, and she rolled over the top, flopping down the other side. Then he clutched the bricks, hauling himself up. The man grabbed his leg, iron fingers gouging into his calf. Another hand took hold of his thigh, yanking. Brick cried out, digging his nails into the crumbling wall. He lashed back, his feet kicking at thin air. The man was howling, loud enough to bring the whole village down on them. Brick kicked again, and this time his foot met something soft. There was a crack, a gargled cry of fury, and he was free. He tumbled over head first, doing a clumsy somersault in mid-air and landing on his back. The impact emptied his lungs, making him groan, but he forced himself up. Daisy was lying in a heap. Adam crouched next to her. They were in another garden, this one filled with crates and old fridges rusted shut. There were noises from behind the wall, angry shouts and something scuffling. The man would be over in seconds. "Move!" wheezed Brick, shoving Adam out of the way so that he could get to Daisy. This time he lifted her onto his shoulder, staggering through the garden and down the side of the building. It was a shop, he realised as he drew level with the front, an electrical store. The front door was open, but there were no people inside. In fact, there were no people anywhere on the street. Just shops, and, up to his left, the church. He set off towards it, making it halfway before he heard the sound of someone screaming. No, not just one person. A load of people. He stopped, looking back. At the other end of the deserted road was a junction, and it was swarming. There must have been 30 people there, maybe more. Cal. He was over there somewhere. He needed help. The churning, howling mass of people changed direction like flocking birds, converging on a point just out of sight. Brick almost took a step towards them. Almost. But you can't go, he thought. You have to look after Daisy. And that was a good enough excuse to make him turn away, walk towards the church, gritting his teeth, so hard he thought they might snap clean out of their gums. He wouldn't see it. He would not see the moment that Cal died, the creature of flame that would rise from his corpse and evaporate into the summer air. He would not see that moment, the moment he was left on his own. He drowned out the screams, running the last few metres to the church and across the wide, tree-lined graveyard. The door was ancient oak and heavy, but it was unlocked. He pushed his way in, Adam entering behind him. Then he threw his body against the door, shutting the madness and the guilt outside, sealing himself in the cool, quiet, secret dark. Oh dear, hope Cal's all right. Oh, Cal. East Walsham, 8:37 a.m. He was dead. Oh, there you go. Or as good as. There was nowhere to run. Ahead, people were streaming out of a shop like a river in spate. In spate? A river in spate. I wrote that, I don't even know what it means. People were streaming out of a shop like a river in spate. Spate. Did I write that? Did I better Google? I bet it's from a... That's so weird. I think that's a typo. That's so weird. Anyway, sorry, I'll start this again. He was dead, or as good as. There was nowhere to run. Ahead, people were streaming out of a shop like a river, all of them howling. They were coming from behind him too, the glass door of a bakery smashed into golden shards as 7, 10, 15 people pushed out onto the street. Cal stumbled away, tripping off the curb. On the other side of the road, 2 men were staggering out of an estate agent's, the fury twisting their features into Halloween masks. There were too many of them, all running. The first, a kid, maybe 11 or 12, with a broken arm in a cast, just seconds away. Cal staggered. He thumped into a car, one of the ones parked along both sides of the road, and before he even acknowledged what he was doing, he'd scrambled underneath it. There was barely enough room for him, the metal rib cage of the car on his back, pinning him against the road. What the hell were you thinking? Something thumped against the car, turning day to dusk. Then it was as if the heavens had opened, hail thundering down all around him, plunging him into absolute night. The screams were so loud that he was drowning in them. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't move, he couldn't do anything but lie there and listen to that deafening, awful chorus. People were flooding underneath, a torrent of limbs and teeth. Hands grabbed and pinched at him, trying to pull him out. Bodies wormed in beside him, crowding his coffin. The car rocked from side to side, its suspension groaning. They would roll it, then they would fall on him, and he would be no more. It wasn't that thought that terrified him, though. After everything, death seemed almost like an old friend. No mystery, no surprises, just one last breath and oblivion. What terrified him was the thought of going cold, turning to ice, while something hatched in the frozen cocoon of his body. Somebody's hand gouged across his face, nails scratching his eyes. He batted them away. The hand reached for him again, dirty fingers in his mouth, and he bit down hard enough to taste blood. His attacker didn't even seem to notice, scratching and snatching at him. He tried to roll over, but there wasn't enough room for his shoulders. He was dead. No! Cal, fight them! The voice didn't sound like his, but there was no doubt it was coming from his head. What did it want him to do? There was another car in front of him, he knew that much. There was a line of them running down the side of the street, parked almost nose to tail. Could he reach it? He started to wriggle forwards. Legs barred the way, forming a fence between his car and the next, but he pushed past them. There wasn't enough room for them to get a proper hold of him, their punches and kicks deflected by the bumpers, and just seconds later he was underneath the next car. It didn't do any good. The crowd followed him, their radar tuned in to whatever it was inside him. He couldn't creep away because they didn't need their eyes to find him. They surrounded him, blotting out the sun, 100 fingers working into his flesh. Burn them! That voice again. It wasn't his, but it was familiar. He tried to tune into it, but whatever it had been, it was now lost in the storm of voices. How? He yelled. Someone was crawling in beside him, a nightmare face with a distended jaw. Cal smashed his elbow into the woman's nose, knocking her out cold. That was good, because the other ferals couldn't reach past her. They were still squeezing in from every other angle, though, pinching and biting. All the while that same voice pleaded, burn them, burn them, burn them. Fuel. That was it. He was under a car, and somewhere above him was the tube that fed petrol into the engine. He didn't know much about cars, but you didn't have to be an engineer to know that if you ripped enough pipes, something flammable would eventually start leaking. He struggled onto his back, reached up, ignoring the pain as something bit into his leg. There were dozens of tubes above him, huge pipes and smaller, softer lines. He grabbed one of the latter, pulling hard. It resisted, but he didn't let up, wrenching at it with everything he had until it tore loose. Fluid dripped from it, but it wasn't petrol. He knew that from the smell. He scrabbled for another. It was too dark to see anything, and twice he felt a hand clutch at his fingers, only just managing to shake them free. Come on, he said. Where are you, you piece of... Another pipe. And this time when he tore it from its mount, the pungent smell of fuel instantly punched up into his sinuses. He gagged, feeling the steady drip of petrol onto his clothes, forming a pool beneath him. That was a problem, because even if he found a way to spark it, he'd be burned alive in the fireball. You do have a way, said the voice. And Cal suddenly saw the restaurant back in Fursville, the candles. He reached into his pocket, feeling the box there. Matches. He pulled them free. Something thumped into his arm, and they almost spilled, but he clutched the little box tight, sliding it open and taking a match from inside. That still left the whole being burned alive problem. Think, he yelled, his voice lost in the howls around him. He needed to move again, get under the next car. He grabbed hold of the underside of the vehicle, using it to pull himself backwards. Once again there were ferals in the way, but the space between the cars was too tight for them to grab hold. He wiggled his way across, the crowd following, burrowing in next to him like maggots into old flesh. He drew the match across the box. Once, twice, 3 times before it sparked. Careful not to drop it on himself, he flicked the flaming stick back the way he'd come. It bounced off a tyre, looked for a second as though it was going to go out, then landed in the gutter in a puddle of fuel. Darkness exploded into light. Every scrap of metal beneath the car, every distorted face, every bloodied fingernail revealed in impossible detail. The flames spread fast, engulfing the people closest to the car. One of the men who was crawling underneath lost his face to the fire, but even through the inferno, even as his eyes melted, he raged. Cal's shoes were on fire and he thrashed his legs to extinguish the flames. There was no air, his lungs full of smoke and smouldering flesh. An explosion ripped through the car in front as the fuel tank ignited, the shockwave peeling away the crowd. This was his chance, now or never. He rolled to his side, lashing out at the people in his way, gouging at eyes and throats and everything else he could find until the sky opened up. They were on him before he could stand up, but he threw himself away, heading into the smoke so that they wouldn't be able to see him. He collided with a flaming shape, shoving it as another blast shook the street. He was running now, a lumbering, unsteady shamble. Oh, but man, was it good to be moving. He felt like he'd escaped from his tomb. He put his head down, nothing quite working the way it should, but each clumsy step carrying him further from the pack. Only when he could no longer feel the heat of the fire on his back did he risk turning around. The street was a mess. At least 4 or 5 of the closely packed cars now engulfed. The smoke was too thick to really see much else, but Cal could make out a dozen shapes there, bodies dressed head to toe in fire, weaving in and around each other like ballroom dancers. Even now, they were coming after him. He was grateful for the fury because they would never know what happened to them, these people. They would never know the horror of their own deaths. One burning thing collapsed to its knees, and another, the dance coming to an end. Other shapes were emerging from the billowing black curtain, though, soot-black silhouettes that stumbled towards him. They couldn't have him, though. Not now, not ever. Cal turned, began once again to run, while that same quiet voice rose up once again in his skull. Burn them. Burn them. Burn them all. Rilke. Great Yarmouth, 8:52 a.m. Burn who, little brother? Schiller started as though he'd been woken from a dream. He licked his lips as if to erase all trace of the words, looking at Rilke with big, sad eyes. They were still walking along the coast, south, leaving a vast blanket of dust in their wake. They hadn't seen more than a handful of people since the last little town, the trailer park. Word must be spreading that something bad was coming. No, something good, she thought. Something wonderful. I asked you a question, Schiller, she said. Her brother had started whispering those words a few minutes ago. Burn them, as though reciting a mantra to himself. She assumed he was speaking about the humans. She had come to call them that, knowing she was no longer one of them. That the purpose of their mission was finally getting through to him. Yet there was something in the urgency of his speech, and in the way his eyes had flicked back and forth, seeing a world that she could not see, that made her think he was hiding something. Burn who? Nobody, he said. I mean everybody. Sorry, I didn't even know I was saying it. She held his gaze until he broke away and peered out across the quiet, slate-coloured water. He was chewing something over, she could tell. She knew her brother better than he knew himself, and there was something inside that little head of his that wanted out. Shill, I won't ask you again. Hi. He kicked at the wet sand, clumps of it sticking to his shoe. Then he looked up at her. There was no fire in his eyes, but they seemed somehow brighter. It's nothing, really. I'm just tired. She opened her mouth to press him, but decided not to. They were all tired, exhausted, really. Shill, her, and Marcus, and Jade, who traipsed behind with a new boy strung up between them. It was a wonder they hadn't all dropped dead from fatigue. There will be plenty of time to sleep, she said, and a whole world to rest our heads on. Imagine it, Schiller. How quiet it will be. How empty. He nodded, staring at his feet as he shuffled down the beach. It was infuriating, Rilke thought, that her brother went back to being his usual self. Why couldn't he be an angel all the time? Why should she have to put up with these bouts of snivelling misery in between his displays of godlike rage? She knew the reason. It was evident in the bald patch above his right ear and the waxy sheen of his skin. Too much fire would kill him. One more, she said, looking up ahead. The wide, sandy beach led towards a town, a big one by the look of things. A cluster of houses sprang up to their right, and past them was a collection of piers and promenades blighted by towers. This place. Can you end it? Schiller seemed to shrink at the thought. His back stooped as though all the world rested on it. He looked ready to wither away into dust and sand. It was pathetic. Where was the creature inside him? Where was the angel? She felt a hot stew of anger rise from her gullet, and for a second she saw nothing but white. Schiller must have sensed it. He knew her temper well enough to fear it, because he gave her a sharp, hurried nod. Then end it, she said. Somewhere, Far away down the beach, a bright yellow kite nuzzled the sky like a hungry fish. Maybe the word hadn't spread as far as she'd thought. Maybe people hadn't heard about Hemsby, about Caister. Well, they'd know soon enough. The world erupted into colour as Schiller transformed, tongues of blue and orange fire licking at the beach, freezing the damp sand and spreading a web of silk-like ice all the way to the water's edge. It was getting easier for him, Rilke realised. He didn't even flinch as the wings unfurled from his back, sails of pure energy that emitted a ceaseless pulse, one which made her bones hum like a tuning fork that would not quiet. His red-rimmed eyes erupted, the light inside them like molten rock, spitting and spilling down his face. Schiller began walking, floating, towards the sea, plant-like tendrils of light curling up from the ground as if to touch his feet. The water retreated from him like a wild cat, lurching back in desperate movements, hissing and steaming. His fire was cold, but it was something else he was trying, something new. What is it like, little brother, she thought, to wish the world apart and watch it obey, to peek inside the very centre of things, the spinning orbits that make us all, and to pull them inside out? Schiller opened his mouth, spoke something wordless and world-ending. She didn't see it, but she heard it, or rather felt it, because the sound of his voice was so alien that her ears almost couldn't register it, like when a church organ plays a subsonic note. But it raged inside her head, inside her stomach, inside every single cell, forcing her to her knees. The sea rose up, a wall of water as thick as rock, so immense and so sudden that Rilke screamed. Vertigo hit her like a punch to the gut. The sight of the ocean there, upended, the unbearable groan of 1 billion gallons of water held against its will. It was just too much. She had to look away, curl into herself, unable to stop the cries that spilled from her lips. The ground was trembling, and she expected it to split open, to disintegrate at Schiller's touch and plunge them all into darkness. The wall of water made a noise, like 1 million peals of thunder resounding at once. The sand so agitated that it leapt 2 foot into the air. Not seeing was worse than seeing, and Rilke peered through her half-shut eyes to glimpse Schiller, her burning boy, standing before the wave. It towered above him, 50 metres, 100, she couldn't tell. Probing fingers of sunlight sluiced through it, turning the water a colour she had never before seen in her life, a deep, angry green filled with flecks that could have been fish or boats or rocks or people. It churmed and raged and howled with anger at the way he was treating it, but it could not refuse him. Schiller turned, his mouth still open, still speaking in that voiceless, deafening, unbearable whisper. Then he raised his hands towards the town and let his new pet off the leash. The water surged past her, around her, over her, a tunnel of noise and movement that seemed as if it would never end. But it did, the rush and thunder gradually fading, leaving only the ringing in her ears. She looked up to see the ruined beach, stripped of its sand to the bone-white stone beneath, and beyond that a roiling black line as the ocean did its work, a giant eraser scrubbing the horizon clean in frantic, desperate motions, leaving trails of white foam that reached for the sky. There was another sound behind her, the sonic boom of the displaced ocean as it filled the space Schiller had created. It thrashed and spat towards them, as if seeking revenge, but crashed to a halt against the invisible bubble of energy that surrounded them. It felt like 1,000 years before the sea grew quiet again, its outrage turning to a stunned, silent disbelief. Rilke tried to get to her feet, the unsettled ground spreading out beneath her, making her lose her footing. Schiller showed no sign of turning back into the buoy, hovering before her, those twin portals, watching the last of the tidal wave as it soaked back into the earth. "Well done, Schiller," she said, and before she even knew it was coming, a giggle tumbled out of her mouth. She glanced over her shoulder to make sure the others were still there. Marcus and Jade looked back, moon-eyed, and she wondered how much of them remained intact, whether there would be anything left inside their heads for their angels to possess. "Are you ready to move?" Marcus nodded, slowly, as if each movement of his head required every ounce of his intelligence. Jade didn't reply at all. "Let's get away from here," Rilke said, finally managing to stand. "Find somewhere to rest. I think you deserve it, Schill." He cocked his head, his molten eyes fixed on her, and she wondered just how much control he had. Not over the earth, that much was clear in what had just happened, but over her. She had trained him well over the years, the way you train a dog to know who is in charge. But how many dogs, if they knew they were faster, stronger, deadlier than their masters, would continue to tread by their heels? Come on, she thought, willing the message deep inside her to whatever part of her soul her angel occupied. You need to hurry up, because we can't control him forever. And what would happen then? What would her fate be if Schiller turned against her? She watched him float away, and once again she wondered who he had been talking to. Burn them. And more importantly, who he had been talking about. And in doing so she realised, for the first time in her life, that she was scared of her brother. I'll do a couple more. Rilke. Oh no, not Rilke. Brilke. I'm going mad. Brick. Brick and Rilke. I guess if they had a baby they would call it Brilke. I don't know. Or if they were in one of those relationships. Brilke. I'm talking nonsense. Brick. East Walsham. 9:03 a.m. It wasn't the explosions that stirred him, but the softer sound of movement from inside the church. Brick shook the grogginess from his head, realising that he'd almost drifted off to sleep in the unnatural stillness of the vestibule. His tiredness was like wearing a lead suit, pushing everything down, making each movement 100 times harder than it should have been. The noise came again, short echoing taps that could have been footsteps. He braced a hand on the wall and struggled to his feet, rubbing his eyes until spots of light danced in front of him. There was another door opposite the one they'd entered through, this one just as old and just as solid. It stood an inch or two ajar, a current of cool air seeping through the crack. A distant explosion rumbled through the ancient stone. What the hell was it? It sounded like someone was dropping bombs on the town. It's Cal, he thought. It's the noise of him dying, but he hadn't felt the boy's death, not like he'd felt Chris's back in the field beside Fursville. That sudden tearing inside him, like a piece of him had been wrenched loose. So maybe Cal was still alive then. Oh, please, please, please. Maybe Brick wouldn't be on his own. He thought for a moment about leaving Daisy where she lay, in a heap against the door, but then decided not to. There was a chance he might have to make a quick getaway. He steeled himself for the cold, then squatted down and fumbled her into his arms. She looked so dead. Adam sat beside her, staring at Brick with an expression that was part fear and part hate. Well, the hell with him. It wasn't his job to make the little kid happy. It wasn't like Adam had helped carry Daisy. He hadn't done much of anything. He walked to the inner door, peering into the gloom beyond. He could make out some stone columns and the back row of wooden pews, but that was about it. There were huge stained glass windows in there, but if anything they seemed to keep the day outside, only a trickle of sickly light making it through. The glass saints, or whatever they were, stared at Brick with lead eyes, and he half expected them to start hollering a warning. Someone's here! Someone's here! He used a knee to ease open the door, entering the church. It was bigger than it looked from the outside. Way bigger. There must have been 15 rows of pews leading up to an altar. It stank of the cold in here, of stone and damp and endless centuries. He wrinkled his nose, waiting to hear the screams, waiting for something to charge down the aisle, baying for his blood. Or maybe things would be different here. It was a church, after all. Brick wasn't exactly a believer, but he'd always had an open mind. It seemed a bit stupid to assume anything, when there was no way anyone could possibly know, not until you were dead anyway. So maybe Cal was right, and this is where they'd find the answers. Something moved up ahead, a dark shape in the space behind the altar. It lumbered to one side with the sound of feet sliding over stone, and Brick's stomach almost shot right up his throat and out of his mouth. It reminded him of Lisa. Oh, don't think it. Stuck in the basement, just a bag of broken bones on the floor, still trying to get to him, to hurt him. The shape coughed, then, to Brick's utter relief, spoke. Hello? The voice sounded as old as the church. Can I help you? Don't come any closer, Brick said. Just stay where you are. Excuse me? The shape stepped up to the altar, into a shaft of murky, multicoloured light, revealing a vicar's black suit and white collar. He was a plump, elderly man with a completely bald head and glasses, which he removed, wiped on his sleeve, then replaced. I mean it, Brick said. Stay there. I don't know who you think you are, young man, but I don't appreciate being spoken to like that. The vicar took a defiant step from the raised platform, and Brick hoisted Daisy against his chest. "Take one more step and I swear to God I'll hurt her," he said, not sure what else to do. "Go on, test me, but it'll be on you if anything happens." He could hear the trembling desperation in his voice, and the vicar must have too, because he held up his hands, retreating up the steps to the altar. There was a good 25-30 metres between them. So long as neither of them crossed the invisible line of the Fury, they should get on just fine. "Sit down," Brick said. The man wheezed as he lowered himself onto the top step. "Easier said than done for me these days," he said with a nervous laugh. "But it's getting up that's the real problem." "Then don't get up," Brick snapped. "Is there anyone else here?" "Just me," the vicar replied, shaking his head. "Margaret has Mondays off. She goes into Norwich to see our daughter and our grandchildren, and—" "You better not be lying to me," Brick said. "I'm not." The back row of pews was right in front of him, and Brick laid Daisy down there. In here, surrounded by stone, she seemed even colder than before. "Sit there," he said to Adam, pointing to the space beside her. "Don't say anything." The little boy obeyed, and Brick wrapped his arms around himself, trying to hold in the shivers. If the old vicar was telling the truth, then at least they were safe in here, for the moment anyway. "Is she okay?" the man asked. "The girl? She looks sick. If you like, I could take a look at her. I was a medic many years ago before I found the faith, in the army." He spoke this last sentence with what felt like a warning, but Brick ignored it. He paced back and forth behind the pews, trying to work out a plan. If Cal was dead, then it was up to him to work out what to do about Daisy and Adam, about Rilke and her brother, and about the man in the storm too. The thought of it all resting on his shoulders was enough to make his heart shrink to a raisin and plop into the stew of his stomach. He slapped his forehead with the heels of his palms. "Whatever the problem is," the vicar said, "let me help you." "Oh, shut up," Brick said, pointing to the decorative curtain that hung behind the altar, rope tassels dangling from either side. "I need you to tie yourself up. Use them." "Please, son." "Do it, before I lose my temper." The vicar started to rise, and Brick almost shrieked at him. "I didn't say get up." "Calm down, for God's sake. He's an old man. He's not going to hurt you," he thought. Unless he got too close, of course. Then he'd be clawing at Brick with those wrinkled hands and gnawing at his throat with his dentures. Yes, he was being more of an arsehole than ever, but he couldn't take any chances. He watched the vicar lean back and pull the ropes free, struggling to bind his wrists. "Wait," Brick said. "Tie the rope to the altar first, to the banister there. Just one wrist will do. Don't worry about the other one." The man did as he was told, looping the rope around the wooden pole of the banister before knotting it tight around his left wrist. He gave it a tug to show that it was secure. Then he shrugged at Brick. "Knot it again," said Brick. "If you're in trouble, there's always a way out," the vicar said as he followed orders. "Please, son, let me help you. Help her before things get out of hand." "Out of hand," Brick said, laughing bitterly. "Just shut up a minute. I need to think." "Is this to do with the attack? The one in London?" "Attack?" Brick asked. "What are you talking about?" "You haven't heard? It's been on the news all morning. There's been a terrorist attack in North London, some kind of bomb, a big one. They're still trying to figure out what it is. We're all frightened, but we'll get through this together." It took Brick a second to understand. Not a bomb, a storm, and a man inside it who wanted to devour the world. He didn't reply, just waved the vicar's words away as he would have chased off a bluebottle. Priorities. The first thing he needed to do was eat something. Once he had some food in his belly, some water too, he'd be able to think straight. "At least tell me your name," the vicar said, "and the names of your friends. I'm Douglas. Doug." "You got any food, Doug?" said Brick. "Not in the church, no. Margaret doesn't allow it. But there's plenty in the vicarage, just over the yard. If you let me go, I'd be happy to show you." "You stay put," Brick said, grabbing the back of Adam's t-shirt and hoisting him to his feet. "I'm taking him, and if I come back and find you've moved, I swear to God I'll do something bad. Do you understand me?" He felt like a bank robber holding hostages, and he hated himself for it. But what choice did he have? He was taking a huge risk anyway, leaving Daisy, because if the priest did free himself and tried to help her, he'd end up tearing the girl to ribbons. "I said, do you understand me?" "I understand," Doug said, nodding. "I won't move. I'm on your side, son. Whatever it is you're trying to do, it's all in the kitchen. The front door's open. We never lock it." Brick took one last look at Daisy, then set off, pulling Adam alongside him by the scruff of his neck. The little boy was trying half-heartedly to wriggle free, making so much noise that Brick didn't hear footsteps until the outer door of the church started to swing inwards. He fell back, almost tripping over Adam. Sunlight streamed past a figure there, gleaming off the blood on his clothes and skin, turning him into yet another stained glass saint with pockets of lead for eyes. The figure lurched into the church, dragging in the stench of smoke. "Cal!" The boy stumbled, started to fall, and Brick caught him clumsily beneath the arms. He dragged him into the body of the church, lowering him gently to a sitting position against the back wall. Scratch marks covered his face and neck and arms like veins, and his trainers were black and misshapen, as if they'd been burned. "Cal, Jesus, are you okay?" It was a stupid question, but after a few seconds, Cal's roving eyes finally landed on Brick, and he nodded. He opened his mouth, uttering a percussion of dry, clacking notes from deep inside his throat. "Okay, okay. Cold? Huh? Am I cold?" Cal asked, his eyes dark with fear. Brick understood what he was asking, laying his hand on Cal's forehead. The skin was hot. "No, mate, you're burning up." Cal breathed a sigh of relief, bubbles of blood bursting on his chapped lips. "Could do with some water, mate." "Yeah, sure. Is it safe out there?" Cal nodded. "Well, it better be," was all he could think of to say. He straightened, wondered if maybe he should just scoop a handful of water out of the font or something before deciding that was probably bad luck. And bad luck was the last thing he needed right now. He headed for the vestibule, pointing at the vicar. "I'll be back in a second. If you try to escape, he'll hurt you. Understand?" Cal didn't look in a state to hurt anyone, but the old man seemed to have resigned himself to the fact that he was here for the long haul. "Adam, sit down and don't move." Brick walked to the outer door, peering through it. Sunlight poured through the swaying trees, forming golden disco lights on the grass and the graves there. But the cemetery was deserted. There was nothing ahead but the street, so he set off to his right, hugging the lichen-slicked wall of the church, turning the corner to see another building spitting distance away. It was made of stone too, with leaded windows and a thatched roof. It could have been something from a fairy tale. Once again checking that the coast was clear, he dashed across the graveyard, turned the handle, and let himself in. It was almost as cold in here as in the church, but there was a smell in the air, some kind of soap. It made him think of his mum, long dead, buried in a church just like this out near King's Lynn, where her folks had lived. It was too painful to think about, so he shut the thoughts out of his mind, using anger to batten down the hatches the way he always did. The kitchen was small, but easy to find. There was a bread bin on the table, and he pulled a loaf out from inside, white and fluffy. While he chewed, he opened the fridge, taking out a packet of ham and a hunk of cheddar. He guzzled it all, washing it down with a swig of milk. There was a bottle of Golden Badger ale knocking around at the back of the fridge, and he swiped it, popping the cap on the edge of the counter. He'd never really been a big drinker. He'd seen what lager and cheap whiskey had done to his dad, but there were certain occasions that demanded alcohol: birthdays, weddings, and being possessed by angels who want you to save the world from a force of pure evil. He took 2 long, deep pulls, letting his mind grow still and quiet. Christ, how long had it been since he'd done that? The silence was so immense that it was unnerving, threatening even, and he straightened up, clearing his throat, taking another swig of sweet, frothy ale. He needed water. He walked to the sink, noticing the portable television on the countertop. Maybe he should check the news. If this man in a storm, really was in London and they thought it was a terrorist attack, then it would be over the news on every channel. He reached for the button, but froze halfway. Did he really want to see it? Did he really want to see this thing that they were supposed to fight? Because up to now, the man in the storm, Daisy's words he knew, even though she'd never spoken them, had just been in his head. Seeing it on screen would make it real. He left his hand there for a moment, then jabbed the on button. It was an old set and it took a few seconds to warm up, the grey mush gradually giving way to a kids' show. A little penguin with a funny orange beak was scooting around an igloo honking. That had to be good news, didn't it? He pressed the channel down button, and it was as if the television was a dam that had suddenly broken. 1,000,000 tons of filthy water sluicing from the screen, blasting away the kitchen, the vicarage, the cemetery, and everything else, filling up Brick's nose and mouth and lungs. He saw it there, amidst the darkness, grainy footage of a vast churning vortex of smoke and debris, suspended above the city, above the skyscrapers. He saw the clouds of matter that spiralled it, all being sucked towards the centre of the storm, towards... There was a man there. Only not a man. How could it be? It was too big, its body ballooned to the size of a building. And yet there it was, its mouth the very core of this abomination, the event horizon at the centre of the black hole. Even from this distance, even on the small screen of the television, Brick could feel the force of the thing, the sheer unrelenting power of it as it dismantled the world piece by piece. He dropped to his knees, the bottle slipping from his hand, forgotten. And somehow, impossibly, the man in the storm seemed to see him there, cowering in this kitchen, because its dead eyes rolled in their sockets, filling with something that was not laughter, that was not madness, that was not glee, but some combination of all three. It looked at Brick, and it spoke, a voice that was lost in the thunder of the tornado, drowned out by the roar of its fury, a voice speaking in no language Brick could recognise, no language that had any place here on earth, but a voice he could understand as easily as if it had crawled into his ear and breathed its needled words directly into his brain. "You are too late." Oh, that's a good place to stop, actually, because we're about to end. Let me see on my phone. About to end. Oh, I do have words there, I promise. The Other, part 2 is next. And, this is the chapter. The next chapter is the chapter that got cut from the American edition, which I quite like. So we'll read those to you, and probably some more next time. I hope you enjoyed that. That scene with Cal cowering under the car. Well, everyone tries to crowd in around him and scratching and biting. Oh, that gave me nightmares when I wrote it. Like my worst nightmare. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, even though I fumbled my way through it very unprofessionally, as always. And yeah, I'll try not to leave it too long. I'll try to do another one tomorrow. Tomorrow's Wednesday. I don't do anything on a Wednesday. So I should hopefully be back with you then. But take care until then. And look after yourselves. Do something for yourself today, something nice, whatever that might be. And I'll see you very soon. See you later, guys. Bye.